We don't want you here. Pack your things and go. Those words spoken by the seventh family in 7 months didn't break Sophia Bennett. What broke her was the silence after. No apology, no explanation. Just a door closing in her face on a winter morning cold enough to freeze tears before they fell. If you've ever been told you weren't enough by someone who never took the time to know you, stay with us. Because this is the story of a woman who was turned away 7 times and chosen completely by one man who saw what no one else could. Subscribe, hit that bell, and tell us in the comments, what city are you watching from today? Sophia Bennett was 31 years old, and she had learned in the way that only hardship teaches that kindness was not always rewarded, that competence was not always seen, and that a woman alone in Colorado territory, in the year 1887, was considered a problem to be solved rather than a person to be known. She had come west on a hope. That was all. She'd had a hope. 2 dresses folded into a worn carpet bag. A letter of introduction from the Methodist minister in Abilene, who had described her as a woman of good character and strong capability, and enough coin in her pocket to buy herself 3 days of food if she was careful about it. She had not planned to need more than that. She had believed the way young women believe before life corrects them, that people would see her clearly if she simply worked hard enough, smiled warm enough, tried, earnest enough. She had been wrong. The first family was named Colton. Settlers from Ohio who had built up a cattle operation southeast of Denver and needed a woman to help manage the household while the wife recovered from a difficult childbirth. Sophia had arrived clean and presentable, had sat at their kitchen table, and answered every question they put to her. Honestly had demonstrated that she could cook, that she understood basic accounting, that she knew how to manage a house with scarce resources. The wife, pale and exhausted in her bedroom doorway, had looked at Sophia for a long moment, and then looked at her husband and said nothing. The husband had cleared his throat. "We appreciate you making the trip out. We'll be in touch." They were not in touch. Sophia had waited 3 days at the boarding house in the nearest town before understanding what that silence meant. The second family was the Hargraves, a merchant and his mother who ran a dry goods store and needed someone to manage the domestic side of things, while the merchant's elderly mother grew too frail to do it herself. Sophia had cooked for them for 2 days, a kind of trial period they'd proposed, and at the end of it, the mother had called her to the parlor and said with the particular gentleness of someone who believes they are being kind while doing something cruel, "You're a fine cook, dear, a fine cook, but I don't think you're quite what we pictured." Sophia had asked as steadily as she could manage, "What did you picture?" The old woman had smiled a closed smile and said nothing further. The third, the fourth. By the time Sophia reached the 5th family, the Wardens, a prosperous farming family with 4 children, and a house that smelled like wood smoke and unwashed dishes. She had already begun to understand that the rejections had less to do with her and more to do with some picture people carried in their minds of what a woman should look like, should sound like, should be. She was too direct. That was the 5th family's complaint, delivered not to her face, but through the minister who had brokered the arrangement, who told her apologetically that the Wardens felt she had a forceful manner that might unsettle the children. She had sat with that one for a long time. Forceful manner. She had spoken plainly when spoken to. She had offered her honest assessment of the household accounts when asked for it. She had pointed out gently but clearly that 2 of the 4 children showed signs of a respiratory illness that needed a doctor's attention, not a home remedy. For caring enough to say the true thing, she was too forceful. The 6th family she would not think about. Not yet. Not today. The 7th was the Prescotts, and it was at the Prescott farm on a morning in late November when the first real snow of the season was coming down in straight, heavy curtains that Sophia Bennett sat in a wooden chair beside a cold fireplace and heard the words that had finally, after 7 months, come close to breaking her. "We don't want you here. Pack your things and go." Gerald Prescott had not said it cruelly. That was the worst part. He had said it the way a man says something he has thought about carefully and decided is simply practical. A business decision. Nothing personal. The kind of thing that happens in this world and mustn't be dwelt upon. He was a heavy-set man, Gerald Prescott, with a thick mustache and the look of someone who had prospered through a combination of luck and stubbornness and believed this made him wise. His wife Marjorie stood in the doorway to the kitchen and did not look at Sophia directly. She was a woman who could not quite bring herself to watch an unpleasant thing be done, but could not quite bring herself to stop it either. Sophia looked at Gerald Prescott for a moment. She was aware of her own heartbeat. She was aware of the cold in the room and the sound of snow against the window and the fact that she had 42 cents in her pocket and nowhere specific to go. "May I ask why?" Gerald shifted his weight. "It's nothing against you personally." "Then what is it against?" His jaw tightened just slightly. He was not accustomed to being questioned by women he was dismissing. "We just think someone else would be a better fit. For our family, our particular needs." "I've been here 11 days, Sophia said. "I reorganized your pantry, repaired the loft stairs before someone fell through them, taught your youngest to read 3 letters of the alphabet, and made sure your sick cattle got separated from the healthy ones before the illness spread to your whole herd. What part of that wasn't a fit?" Marjorie Prescott made a small sound from the doorway. Not quite a protest. Not quite agreement. Something in between that she swallowed back down. Gerald's face did something complicated. "That's all well and good, but a household needs certain—" He stopped, started again. "There are things a man considers when it comes to the person sharing his home. Things beyond practical matters." Sophia understood. She had understood for a while if she was being honest. She understood what Gerald Prescott meant when he said certain things, when he talked about what a man considered. She understood what Marjorie Prescott meant by that sound she'd swallowed. She was not pretty in the way they'd imagined. She was not soft-spoken in the way they'd hoped. She was not young and pliable and easy to overlook. She was 31, brown-haired, level-eyed, with capable hands, and a directness of gaze that seemed to unsettle people who were used to women looking slightly sideways, slightly down, slightly away. She picked up her carpet bag. "Your youngest's name is Thomas," Sophia said, not raising her voice. "He has difficulty sleeping because he's frightened of the dark, and no one's noticed. He hides a candle stub under his mattress and lights it after everyone's asleep. Before the snow gets heavy, someone should check that so he doesn't burn the house down." She put on her coat. "The loft stairs, the middle one is still weak. The second repair didn't hold. You'll want to fix that before spring when the children are running up and down." She picked up her bag. "I hope you find someone who fits your picture, Mr. Prescott." She walked out into the snow. The cold hit her like a wall. She stood on the Prescott porch for just a moment, just long enough to take one breath and then another and then a third, because there was a thing inside her chest that wanted to come out in a way that was neither dignified nor useful, and she did not intend to let it. She had 42 cents. She had a carpet bag with 2 dresses and a spare pair of stockings and a small Bible with her mother's handwriting in the margins. She had no letter of introduction anymore, because the minister in Abilene was the kind of man who wrote 1 letter per person and considered his obligation discharged. She had no clear destination, and she had 7 rejections behind her in 7 months. Each one different in its particulars and identical in its essential message, which was, "You are not what we wanted." She stood on the porch. She took another breath. Then she picked up her bag and walked down the steps and out through the gate and onto the road. She did not look back. She walked for 2 hours before the cold became serious. Not uncomfortable serious. There was a difference, and a woman who had grown up on the Kansas plains understood it in her body before her mind caught up. The difference between cold that was unpleasant and cold that intended to kill you was something you felt in your fingertips first, then your face, then a particular stillness in your thinking that was more dangerous than it felt. She had passed 2 farms, both dark, both clearly occupied by people who had their own worries on a snowy November afternoon and were not watching the road for strangers. She had not knocked. She had considered it. She was practical enough to consider it. But the thought of knocking on another door of another face, looking at her with that particular combination of calculation and dismissal, she couldn't. Not today. Not yet. The road curved upward into the mountains. She had not intended to follow it upward. She had intended to find the valley road that led toward the nearest town, which a man at the last crossroads had told her was about 6 miles southwest. But somewhere in the curtain of snow, she had taken the wrong fork, and now she was climbing. The cold in her fingertips had spread to her wrists. She stopped walking. She was standing on a mountain road in a snowstorm with 42 cents, and she had no idea how far she had come, or how far the nearest shelter was. And for the first time in 7 months of sustained difficulty, Sophia Bennett felt something she recognized as genuine fear. Not the fear of rejection, not the fear of disappointment, the plain physical fear of being in danger. Her next breath came out shaky. She steadied it. She looked up the road and then down the road and made the only calculation available to her. Up was mountain, down was where she'd come from. Neither was good. But up was forward, and she had a deep instilled resistance to going backward that had nothing to do with logic. She kept walking. 15 minutes later, through the gray curtain of falling snow, she saw a light. It was a ranch house, not a large one, set back from the road behind a split-rail fence that had been repaired in some places and not others, with a barn to one side and a lean-to storage structure to the other, and smoke rising from the chimney in a thick, serious column that meant whoever lived there had built a real fire, not a courtesy one. She stopped at the gate. Her hands were not working properly. She fumbled with the latch for longer than she should have before it gave. She walked up to the door and knocked. Silence. She knocked again, harder. More silence, and then the sound of movement. Inside, unhurried movement. The movement of a man who lived alone and was not accustomed to being interrupted, and was taking the time to decide whether to answer. The door opened. House was tall. That was the first thing. Not in the way that announces itself, but in the way of a man who had been tall so long he'd learned to carry it quietly. He had dark hair going gray at the temples, a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in several days, and eyes the color of deep water, that specific shade of gray-blue that could be calm or cold, depending entirely on what they were looking at. He looked at Sophia. He took in the carpet bag, the snow in her hair, the coat that was not quite warm enough, the particular set of her jaw that was not quite a plea and not quite a demand, but something in between. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "You look tired. Come inside." No question about who she was. No question about where she'd come from. No question about what she wanted. Just, "You look tired. Come inside." Sophia had heard hundreds of first sentences in the past 7 months. She had heard, "We've had some inquiries we need to discuss with you." She had heard, "Before we begin, let's be clear about expectations." She had heard, "Tell me about yourself," and she had told people about herself while watching their faces make up their minds before she'd finished her second sentence. She had never heard, "You look tired. Come inside." She walked through the door. The inside of the house was warm. Not decorated warm, functionally warm, the kind of warmth produced by a man who understood cold and had addressed it seriously. There was a large stone fireplace with a proper fire in it, a kitchen area with cast-iron pots hanging in a clean row, a table that was simple but solid, 2 chairs. There were books on a shelf, more books than she'd expected, a rifle mounted above the door, tack hanging on hooks near the entrance, the smell of coffee and wood smoke and something else, pine maybe, from the mountains outside. Levi Hunter crossed to the fireplace and added a log to it without being asked, and then he went to the stove and poured coffee into a tin cup and set it on the table. "Sit." Sophia sat. She wrapped both hands around the cup and felt the warmth move up through her palms and into her wrists, and she sat with that for a moment and did not speak because she was not entirely sure what came out of her mouth would be something she intended. He sat in the other chair. Not close. Across the table. He had his own cup of coffee, and he looked at her with that level gray-blue gaze, and he waited. Sophia had never had a man wait before. They always asked. They always processed. They always moved toward their conclusion before she'd finished offering her information. Levi Hunter simply waited. "My name is Sophia Bennett," she said finally. "I was at the Prescott farm. I was asked to leave this morning." Levi said nothing. He was listening. I took the wrong fork in the road. I didn't intend to come up the mountain. He nodded once. A brief, uncomplicated acknowledgement. You got a place to be. Sophia looked at him. Not at present. He drank his coffee, set the cup down, looked at the fire for a moment, and then back at her. I've got a spare room. It's cold, but I can get a fire going in there. You can stay the night and we'll figure out what makes sense in the morning. She looked at him carefully. She had developed over 7 months of navigating strange households, a reliable instinct for what a man meant when he offered something. She had learned to listen for the condition in the kindness, the thing that was going to be asked for in return. She listened now. She didn't hear one. Why? She asked. The question surprised him slightly. Not offended, just slightly surprised, the way a man is surprised when he has to explain something he considers straightforward. Because it's cold out, Levi said, and you don't have anywhere to go. The room he gave her was small and at the back of the house, and it was cold as he'd warned, but he carried in a pot of coals from the fireplace and got a modest heat going, and there was a bed with 2 wool blankets and a pillow that smelled like cedar and clean air. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the sound of him moving around in the front of the house. Quiet, unhurried, the sounds of a man settling in for the night, and she held her carpet bag in her lap and thought about the fact that she was here at all. 7 families. She counted them, not masochistically, but methodically, the way you count a thing to make sure it's real. The Coltons, the Hargraves, she stopped, skipped the 6th, the Wardens, the 5th family whose name she was already beginning to lose. 2 more. The Prescotts. 7 doors. And then 1 door that opened. She did not know what to make of Levi Hunter. She had been wrong about people before. She had thought the Colton wife might be kind, and had found a woman who let her husband do what she herself couldn't bring herself to stop. She had thought the Hargrave mother might be reasonable, and had found a woman who used gentleness as a weapon. She did not know what Levi Hunter was yet, but she knew that he had opened the door, and that the only condition he'd attached to letting her in was the absence of conditions. That was something she would not know what to do with until she slept on it. She lay down and pulled the wool blankets over her, and fell asleep faster than she had in months, because her body understood even when her mind was still deciding that she was safe. She woke before dawn and lay still for a moment, orienting herself. The room, the ranch, the mountain, the man in the front of the house, who was? She listened, already up, already moving. The smell of coffee reached her even through the closed door. She rose, folded the blankets neatly, put on her 2nd dress, the better one, because whatever this morning held, she intended to meet it presentably. She opened the door. Levi was at the stove. He heard the door and glanced over his shoulder, and then he went back to what he was doing, which was frying bacon with a kind of focused competence that she recognized as someone who had learned to cook for himself and taken it seriously. Coffee's on the table. She poured herself a cup and stood near the fire. He brought the bacon to the table, and then cornbread that he'd had warming in the oven, and they sat across from each other in the gray pre-dawn light, and for a while they simply ate, and the silence was not uncomfortable. She was the one who broke it. You live here alone. It wasn't a question. Going on 9 years, Levi said. The ranch. I run cattle, some, not as many as I used to. He looked at her. You asking for a reason? I'm trying to understand your situation, Sophia said plainly, because I think you're about to offer me something, and I'd like to understand what I'm being offered before I respond to it. He looked at her for a moment. Then something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it, the recognition of someone finding something they hadn't expected. You're right, he said. I am. He set his fork down. I've needed help around here for about 2 years. I've been ignoring that need because it's easier to ignore it than to deal with someone who's going to last 3 weeks and leave. I can run the cattle alone. I can't run the house and the cattle both and keep everything in order the way it needs to be. Things fall apart when I'm not watching them. He paused. The way they do. Sophia waited. I'm not offering charity. I can't pay much, but I can pay something. You'd have the room, meals, and a fair wage what I can manage in exchange for managing the household. The cooking, the supplies, the accounts, if you can keep accounts. I can keep accounts. I figured you could. He looked at her steadily. There are no other conditions. She heard it again, the same thing she'd heard at the door. The absence of a condition where other men had always placed one. You don't want to know anything about me first. I can see what I need to see, Levi said. You walked up a mountain in a snowstorm with a carpet bag and 40 cents, and when I opened the door you asked me directly why I was letting you in. That tells me more than a letter of introduction. Sophia looked at him. It was 42 cents. Levi almost smiled. Even better. She said yes. Not dramatically. Not with relief or tears, or any of the performances that the moment might have called for in a different story. She said yes, the way she said most things directly, with both eyes open, fully aware that yes was a beginning and not a conclusion, and that what came after it would be the real test of everything. Levi nodded once the way he'd nodded the night before, when she told him she had no place to be. A brief, uncomplicated acknowledgement of a thing that was now decided. I'll show you how the place is set up, he said. That was the beginning. The first week was practical. There was a great deal to do, and doing it told Sophia more about Levi Hunter than any conversation could have. A house carried the history of whoever lived in it. Not in its decoration, this house had almost none, but in the decisions that had been made or avoided, in the things that had been repaired, and the things that had been allowed to wait in the system of organization that told you how a mind worked. Levi's house told her that he was a man who maintained what was essential and neglected what was secondary. The tools in the barn were impeccably kept. The tack was clean. The cattle records were organized and accurate. The rifle was oiled and functional. The kitchen pantry was a disaster. Not dirty, he was not an untidy man. But it was the pantry of someone who had been managing alone and under pressure for so long that the finer calibrations had gone. Supplies were unevenly stocked. Things that should have been stored dry had gotten damp. There were gaps in provisions that would become serious problems by February if they weren't addressed now. She reorganized the pantry on the second day. It took most of the morning. When Levi came in for his midday meal, he stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the result. He didn't say anything for a moment. I knew it was bad, he said finally. I just kept the door closed. That's one approach, Sophia agreed. Does that mean it was the wrong one? It means the problem got bigger while the door was closed. He looked at her. Point taken. That was the first exchange that felt like more than logistics. Brief. Understated. But it was two people recognizing that the other one was willing to say the true thing, and that was not nothing. The loft was the second project. The ranch house had a sleeping loft that Levi used for storage. She had noticed on the first morning that two of the rungs on the ladder were cracked. Not just stressed, but genuinely compromised. The kind of thing that was fine until someone put their full weight on it and then wasn't fine at all. She asked Levi about the wood on the third day. He looked up from the account books she'd been reviewing. She'd found a discrepancy in the feed costs that she'd wanted to show him and said, "What do you need it for?" The ladder rungs. Two of them need replacing before one of them goes entirely. He was quiet for a moment. I noticed that a while back. How long a while? He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. 8 months, he said. Maybe 10. Sophia considered this. Get me the wood. I can replace them. You know how to do that. I grew up on a farm in Kansas, Sophia said. I know how to do most things that need doing when the person who's supposed to do them is busy with something else. He got her the wood. She replaced the rungs. When she was done, she climbed the full ladder to test it, and from the top she could see out the small window at the end of the loft and the mountains beyond. And she stood up there for a moment and looked at them. She had never been this close to mountains before. She had grown up in flat country, had moved across plains and river valleys, had never once been somewhere. The land rose up around you like this. There was something about it, the way the peaks stood against the sky, the sense of permanence they carried that did something to the thing inside her chest that had been clenched for 7 months. She climbed back down. It's solid, she told Levi. Good. He paused. Thank you. 2 words. But the way he said them, not performative gratitude, but the genuine acknowledgement of a man who had been carrying too many things alone and had just been relieved of one of them, made the 2 words count for more than most speeches. By the end of the first week, Sophia had learned the following things about Levi Hunter. He rose before dawn every morning and was already outside before she'd made the first pot of coffee, which meant he'd been awake earlier than that, but didn't want to wake her. He ate whatever she cooked without complaint or commentary, except once when she'd made a beef stew with more pepper than he'd expected, and he'd looked at the bowl and then looked at her and said, "You like pepper?" And she'd said, "I like food that tastes like something." And there had been a beat of silence, and then he'd eaten the whole bowl and had a second helping. He read in the evenings, not newspapers, books. She had looked at the titles on his shelf and found with some surprise Dickens and Thoreau, and a well-worn copy of the complete works of Shakespeare, and a technical manual on land surveying that had been opened so many times it had lost its spine. When she'd asked him about the Shakespeare, he had said without looking up from whatever he was currently reading, "My mother sent it. I read it so I'd have something to write to her about. Is she still alive?" A pause. No. Sophia had not pushed further. She had learned by the end of the first week that Levi Hunter was a man who had built a life of complete self-sufficiency, not because he didn't want company, but because he'd decided at some point that wanting company and getting it were 2 different things, and that it was easier not to want. She understood that. She had spent 7 months arriving at the same conclusion by a different road. On the 8th day, something changed. She was in the kitchen at midday, working through the supply accounts and trying to calculate what they'd need to order before the pass road got too dangerous in deep winter, when she heard Levi come in from outside. She heard him stop. She looked up. He was standing in the middle of the room, and he was looking at the kitchen, at the clean surfaces, the organized shelves, the pot she had going on the stove that smelled like something warm and substantial, and his expression was doing something she couldn't quite read. Not unhappy. The opposite of unhappy, but carefully contained, as though feeling it openly might be a risk he wasn't ready to take. "What?" she asked. He blinked, looked at her. "Nothing, just—" He stopped. "It smells like someone lives here." It was such a simple thing, such a quiet, unguarded thing. She didn't think he'd meant to say it the way it came out, without armor, without the contained steadiness he usually wore. She looked back at her accounts. "Someone does," she said, and she did not look up because she understood, in the way that people understand things they do not yet have words for, that they had both just said something that was larger than it sounded, and that the right response to a thing like that was to let it be what it was without making too much of it. At the end of the second week, on a Tuesday afternoon, when the snow had let up and Levi was out checking the herd, a man rode up to the gate. Sophia saw him from the kitchen window. He was well dressed in the way that meant money and wanted you to know it. A good coat, a horse that was too fine for a working ranch. The kind of hat that said this man did not work in the weather. He sat the horse with the ease of someone who had ridden his whole life and carried himself like a man who was accustomed to arriving at places and having those places adjust themselves to him. She went to the door. The man looked at her with mild surprise, the way men looked at women they encountered in places they hadn't expected to encounter them. "Is Levi Hunter about?" "He's not here at present. Can I take a message?" The man's eyes moved past her into the house and then back to her. "And you are?" "The person who just offered to take a message," Sophia said. "Your name and the nature of your business, and I'll make sure he gets it." A thin something moved across the man's face. "Name's Aldous Crane. You can tell Hunter that the offer on his property stands, and it won't stand much longer." He looked at her once more, that assessing, dismissive look she had come to know very well in the past 7 months. "Tell him Crane came by personally. He'll know what it means." He turned his horse and rode back down the mountain. Sophia stood in the doorway and watched him go. She had recognized something in Aldous Crane that had nothing to do with his coat or his horse, or the particular way he sat, as though the saddle had been made to his specifications. She had recognized the way he looked at the ranch, not like a man who wanted to buy a piece of land, like a man who had already decided it belonged to him. When Levi came in that evening, she told him about Crane. She watched his face. It did something careful and controlled that she had begun to understand was what Levi Hunter's face did when he was dealing with something he'd rather not deal with, but had no option of avoiding. Aldous Crane, Levi said. He said the name the way people say names that have been a problem for a while. He said the offer on your property stands and won't stand much longer. Levi set down the tools he'd carried in from the barn. He turned to the fire. He stood with his back to her for a moment. "How long has this been going on?" Sophia asked. "A year and a half." He turned around. "He wants the mountain water rights. My land controls the creek that feeds the valley below. If he owns this ranch, he controls the water for about a dozen other operations." Sophia absorbed this. "And you've refused?" "Every time." "What does he do when he's refused?" Levi's jaw set. "He finds other ways to ask." Sophia thought about the way Aldous Crane had looked at the ranch. She thought about that assessing proprietary gaze. "He's not going to stop," she said. "No." Levi agreed. "He's not." There was a silence. She looked at Levi Hunter, at this man who had opened a door when every other door was closing, who had offered a room and a wage and no conditions, who read Shakespeare by firelight, and had 10 months of cracked ladder rungs because he was always too busy managing everything else alone. "Then we'd better figure out what to do about him," she said. The "we" came out before she thought about it. She didn't take it back. Levi looked at her for a long moment. He did not look away. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We'd better." Outside, the mountain wind picked up and moved through the pine trees with a sound like someone drawing a long, slow breath, and the fire in the ranch house crackled. And inside that house, a woman who had been turned away 7 times, and a man who had spent 9 years deciding he didn't need anyone, sat across a table in the growing dark, and began to figure out what came next. The mountain wind picked up and moved through the pine trees with a sound like someone drawing a long, slow breath, and the fire in the ranch house crackled, and inside that house, a woman who had been turned away 7 times, and a man who had spent 9 years deciding he didn't need anyone, sat across a table in the growing dark and began to figure out what came next. That night, Sophia lay awake for a long time. Not from cold, the room had warmed properly by then, and the wool blankets were doing their work. She lay awake because her mind was doing what her mind always did when it encountered a problem. It turned the thing over, looked at it from each side, set it down, picked it up again. Aldous Crane. The water rights. A year and a half of pressure that hadn't broken Levi yet. The way Crane had looked at the ranch, not the look of a man who wanted something, but the look of a man who had already written the end of a story, and was simply waiting for the other characters to catch up. She had known men like Crane. Not this man specifically, but the kind of man who moved through the world with the absolute conviction that what he wanted was simply a matter of time and the right application of force. She had encountered that type in the household she'd passed through in smaller forms. Men who didn't ask. Men who arranged. Men who understood the world as a series of assets to be acquired and obstacles to be removed. Levi Hunter to a man like Crane was an obstacle. And she was beginning to understand that Levi Hunter, for all his quiet competence, for all the self-sufficiency he'd built over 9 years, was fighting this particular battle with one hand, because the other hand was always busy keeping everything else from falling apart. She thought about that for a while. Then she got up, lit the small lamp on the nightstand, and started making notes. She wrote down everything Crane had said, every word as precisely as she could remember it. She wrote down the way he'd looked at the house, the way his eyes had moved across the land, the phrasing he'd used, "the offer stands. It won't stand much longer." She thought about what each of those phrases meant when you stripped away the politeness. The offer stands. He expected it to be taken eventually. It won't stand much longer. He was setting a deadline. Why set a deadline unless something was changing? Unless there was something happening, some external circumstance that made this land more urgent to acquire now than it had been 6 months ago? She wrote that question down and underlined it. Then she wrote, land records, water rights documentation, original grant. She turned off the lamp and lay in the dark and thought tomorrow. In the morning, she asked Levi about the land grant. She asked it the same way she asked most things, directly over coffee, while the bacon was still in the pan, before he'd had the chance to put on the full armor of his daily competence. She had discovered that Levi Hunter was most honest in the first half hour after dawn, when he was still warm from sleep and not yet fully inside the day. He looked at her. The original grant document. Yes, whatever you have that establishes your right to this land and specifically to the water rights on the creek. He was quiet for a moment. I've got the deed. Filed in Denver when I bought the place. What else? Another pause. Longer this time. There's a box of papers, in the loft. I haven't gone through it in years. Sophia set her coffee cup down. After breakfast, she said, we're going through it. He looked at her with that expression. She was beginning to recognize the one that was not quite resistance and not quite agreement, but something in between, the expression of a man who had been operating alone long enough that being helped felt faintly disorienting. You think there's something in there? I think Crane set a deadline, Sophia said. And I think men like Crane don't set deadlines unless something has changed. I want to know what we have before I figure out what's changed. Levi looked at her steadily. Then he finished his coffee, pushed back from the table, and went to get the box. It took them most of the morning. The box was exactly as described. A wooden crate, dusty lid warped from years of temperature changes, filled with papers in no particular order. Receipts from 1879. A letter from a bank in Kansas City. Survey notes in handwriting. So cramped it took Sophia 10 minutes to learn how to read it. 2 letters from someone named May, written in a careful slanted hand, which she set aside without reading, because those were not her business. And then near the bottom, folded 3 times and slightly water damaged at one corner, but entirely legible, the original land grant. Sophia unfolded it carefully and read it. She read it again. Then she looked up at Levi. Did you know the water rights in this grant extend below the natural creek line? He looked at the document she was holding. What does that mean? It means the grant doesn't just cover the water as it runs through your land. It covers the water table below, which extends significantly further south than the creek itself. She set the paper on the table and pointed. Here, this language, including all subterranean water sources and their natural tributaries as surveyed by R.H. Morgan, October 1871. Do you see that? Levi leaned over the document. How was close enough that she was aware of it, not uncomfortably, but in the particular way you become aware of a person who has been distant and has moved nearer. He smelled like cold air and pine, and the particular clean smell of a man who worked hard outdoors. He read the passage she was pointing to. I see it, he said. If this is accurate, and it would need to be verified against the Morgan survey, then your water rights are significantly more extensive than anyone's been treating them as, including Crane. He straightened up. So why does he want to buy me out rather than just, because he's been treating the legal question as settled? She looked at him. If the rights are more extensive than he's been operating on, then his entire argument for why this land matters to him changes. He doesn't just want your water. He may need to eliminate your prior claim to his water. The room was very quiet. Levi was looking at the document with an expression that was doing several things at once. Things she didn't have names for yet, because she hadn't known him long enough. Where is the Morgan survey? Sophia asked. I don't know. Is it filed somewhere in Denver? A county office? It would be in the Territorial Land Office, Denver. He looked at her. That's 4 days by horse in good weather. Then we need someone to go. She paused. Or write. Can you write to the land office? I can. He was still looking at the document. Sophia. It was the first time he'd used her first name. She waited. If this means what you think it means. I could be wrong. I'm not a lawyer. But I've read enough contracts and account documents to know when something says more than people think it does. She folded the grant carefully. This says more than anyone's been treating it as saying. He nodded. Very slowly. Then I'll write to Denver today. He wrote the letter that afternoon, and Sophia read it before he sealed it, and she suggested 3 clarifying additions that he made without argument, which told her something about him, that he was a man secure enough in himself not to need to resist good suggestions simply because they came from someone else. She sent the letter with the supply rider who came up the mountain road twice a week. Then they waited. Waiting, she discovered, was something Levi Hunter did with the same contained competence. He did everything else. He didn't pace. He didn't speculate unnecessarily. He went about his work. The cattle, the fence line that needed repair on the east side, the firewood that needed splitting before the next serious cold, and he did it with the same steady rhythm he always had. But she noticed things. He checked the road more often, not conspicuously, not anxiously, but she caught him pausing at the window when he came in for meals, glancing toward the gate. She noticed he kept the rifle closer, not displayed, not threatening, but accessible in a way it hadn't been quite the same before Crane's visit. She noticed that when he thought she wasn't watching, something moved across his face. That was neither the contained steadiness, nor the near smile she'd seen a handful of times. Something older and heavier. Something that looked like a man who had been holding a weight for a very long time, and was beginning to feel the full extent of it. On the 5th day after Crane's visit, while she was working through the household accounts, she asked without looking up, "How long has the ranch been in trouble?" Silence. She looked up. Levi was by the fireplace. He had stopped moving. He was looking at her with that expression she was still learning to read. "I didn't say it was in trouble. You didn't need to." She set down her pen. "The feed costs from last winter. The gap in the cattle numbers between January and March. The note from the bank in Kansas City at the bottom of that box." She paused. "I'm not prying, but if you want me to help you manage things properly, I need to understand what I'm working with." A long silence. He crossed the room and sat down across from her at the table, and the fact that he sat, rather than remained standing, told her something significant about what was coming. "The winter before last was bad," he said. "I lost almost a third of the herd. I had a loan coming due, and I couldn't cover it with the losses. I negotiated an extension, but—" He stopped. "The extension runs out in March." March. She looked at the account books in front of her and did a rapid, silent calculation. "How much short are you?" He told her the number. She sat with it. "That's manageable," she said carefully. "Not easily, but—" "Crane knows about the extension," Levi said. She looked at him sharply. "How would he know that me, his brother-in-law, is a senior officer at the bank in Kansas City?" He looked at his hands on the table, then at her. "I found that out 6 months ago, by which point the loan was already structured." Sophia absorbed this. The deadline. Crane's deadline wasn't arbitrary. If Levi's loan extension ran out in March and he couldn't cover it, the bank would have a claim. And if Crane's brother-in-law was positioned at that bank, "He's not just pressuring you to sell," she said. "He's waiting for you to have no other option." Levi's jaw was tight. "That's what I figure." "And the offer he keeps making, enough to cover the loan and maybe 2 years of modest living. Not enough to rebuild, not enough to start fresh anywhere comparable." He looked at her. "It's designed to look like mercy." It was not mercy. They both knew that. It was designed to look like mercy while being exactly sufficient to neutralize the threat and nothing more. Sophia looked at the account books. She thought about the Morgan survey. She thought about the language in the land grant. She thought about Aldous Crane on his fine horse with his proprietary gaze. "If the water rights are what I think they are," she said slowly, "they're worth significantly more than the offer he's making." "Yes?" "He knows that." "Yes." "So the offer is deliberately low because he knows you don't know the full extent of what you have." Levi looked at her. "Say it plain." "He's been buying your land at a discount," Sophia said, "because he's been counting on you not knowing what you're sitting on." The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved through the pines. Levi was very still. "That's a serious thing to say about a man." "It's a serious thing for a man to do." She met his gaze. "I could be wrong about the survey, but if I'm right, even partially right, then the answer isn't to wait and see. The answer is to act before March." I was quiet for what felt like a very long time. "What kind of action?" A lawyer, she said. Someone who knows territorial land law. Not from around here, someone Crane doesn't have a reach to. She paused. And we need to look at the accounts differently. Not what you can cover, but what can be leveraged against the genuine value of the water rights. I was watching her with an expression she had not seen on him before. It was not the controlled steadiness. It was not the near smile. It was something closer to, she didn't let herself finish that thought. You know about this kind of thing, he said. It was not quite a question. I spent 3 years keeping books for a land attorney in Topeka, Sophia said. Before everything else. Before... She stopped. I know enough to know when something matters. He leaned forward slightly. Why didn't you mention that before? You didn't ask me about my past. I told you I didn't need to know. And I respected that. She looked at him steadily. But now you need to know this part, so I'm telling you. He sat back. He rubbed one hand across his jaw, that specific gesture she'd been cataloging without meaning to the one he made when something had shifted inside him, and he needed a moment to accommodate it. Sophia, he said. And then he stopped, and whatever he'd been going to say rearranged itself into something else. Thank you. It was not the same thank you as the latter rungs. That one had been simple. This one had more weight in it. More layers. She looked back at the accounts. Let's get back to work, she said. The reply from the Denver land office came 12 days later. The supply rider handed it to Sophia at the gate because Levi was out with the herd, and she carried it inside and set it on the table, and did not open it because it was Levi's correspondence, and that was his to open. But she looked at it. She looked at it for a solid 2 minutes, the plain brown envelope sitting in the middle of the table like a stone dropped in still water, and she told herself that she did not know what it contained, and that she should wait. When Levi came in and saw it, he stopped. He picked it up. He didn't open it immediately. He held it for a moment, and she could see him deciding something not about the letter, but about whether he wanted to open it alone or in front of her. He sat down at the table and opened it in front of her. He read it. His face went through 3 things in rapid succession. She watched it happen, and then it settled into something she couldn't read. He set it down and pushed it across the table to her. She read it. The land office had located the Morgan Survey of 1871. The survey confirmed the language in the original grant. The subterranean water rights extended, and here was the number precise and documented, 430 feet south of the visible creek line. 430 feet. Sophia looked up from the document. Do you know where Crane's southern water intake is? Levi was looking at her with the expression she still didn't have a name for. About 380 feet south of my creek, he said. The room went very quiet. 380 feet. Well within the 430. Aldous Crane's primary water intake had been for years on water rights that legally belonged to Levi Hunter. He knew, Levi said. His voice was quiet. Very quiet. He must have had access to the original survey. Either that or someone told him. She set this document down. He's been using your water, and he's been trying to buy you out before anyone figured that out. Levi stood up from the table. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her, and she let him have that moment because she understood that what he was processing wasn't just legal complexity. It was the weight of a 1.5 years of pressure of loneliness and financial fear, rearranging itself into something different now that he knew what it had actually been. He'd been fighting a man who was trying to cover a theft. Levi. He turned. This changes everything, she said. You're not the one who needs to make a deal. He is. Something moved across his face, something fierce and controlled and long suppressed. I need a lawyer. Yes. I need a good one. One who knows what to do with this. Yes. She paused. I know someone. From my time in Topeka. He moved his practice to Colorado City 5 years ago. His name is Thomas Reeves, and he's the best territorial land attorney I've ever seen work. She looked at him. But we need to move quickly, before Crane hears we've been to the land office. Levi looked at her for a long moment. How do you know he'll hear? Because men like Crane have ears everywhere, she said. And because his brother-in-law is at the bank and banks talk to other banks and information travels. She folded her hands on the table. We probably have 2 weeks, maybe 3. He absorbed this. Then he said something that surprised her. Come with me. She blinked. To Colorado City. You know Reeves. You understand the documents better than I do. I'd rather have you in that room than try to explain everything myself. He looked at her directly. I'm not asking because I can't manage alone. I'm asking because this will go better with you there. It was such a precise, honest thing to say. Not I need you. Not I can't do this. But this will go better with you there. She understood the difference. She had spent 7 months in households where no one understood that difference. Where need was used as a claim. Where asking for help was always also asking for something to be owed. This was not that. Yes, she said. I'll come. They left 2 days later. The ride to Colorado City was long and cold, and at various points uncomfortable in the particular way that long rides in cold weather always were. But Sophia had ridden enough to manage it, and she had packed provisions sensibly, and they made good time. They didn't talk constantly. That was one of the things she noticed about traveling with Levi. He was not a man who filled silence with noise. He spoke when he had something to say, and otherwise let the country speak for itself, which suited her fine because she had her own thinking to do. But they talked enough. On the first evening, camped near a creek, she told him about the land attorney in Topeka. About the 3 years she'd spent keeping his books, learning the shape of land law by proximity and attention rather than formal study. About what she'd understood, and what she'd only partly understood, and where the edges of her knowledge were. He listened. He asked precise questions, not the questions of someone checking her credentials, but the questions of someone genuinely building a picture of what they were walking into. On the second morning, while they were breaking camp, he told her something. He'd bought the ranch with money. He'd saved over 8 years of working other men's cattle operations. He'd chosen this mountain because the water was clean, and the land was solid, and the price was right, and because he was 32 years old and needed something that was his. He'd been happy there for 6 years before Crane's pressure started. Happy, Sophia said. It was not a skeptical word, just an interested one. Satisfied, he corrected with the slight discomfort of a man who distrusts large words. Like things were as they should be. Is there a difference? He thought about it. Happy's a weather report. Satisfied's a structure. He looked at the horizon. Weather changes. Structure holds. She thought about that for a while. What changed when Crane started? She asked. Everything got smaller. He said it simply. Like the ranch was the same size, but I could only use part of it because the rest was taken up with watching what he was doing next. He paused. You can't build a structure if you're always watching the weather. Sophia looked at the road ahead. Then let's get you your structure back, she said. Thomas Reeves had an office on the main street of Colorado City that smelled like paper and tobacco and the particular dry warmth of a wood stove that had been burning all day. Howe was a small man, thin, with silver hair, and the sharp, rapid eyes of someone who read everything twice and remembered both readings. He had known Sophia from her Topeka days, and when they came through his door, he stood immediately and shook her hand with the genuine warmth of a man who respected her and wanted her to know it. Sophia Bennett, he said. It's been too long. And this is your Levi Hunter, she said. He owns the mountain ranch north of a... I know the Hunter Grant, Reeves said immediately. His eyes sharpened. He looked at Levi. Is this about the Crane business? They both stared at him. Word gets around in land law, Reeves said. He gestured for them to sit. Tell me everything. They told him everything. Reeves listened without interrupting, which was the mark of a good attorney, one who understood that the story contained more information than the individual facts, that the spaces between facts were often where the truth lived. He made 3 notes on a yellow pad. Just 3. Each time he wrote something in his expression, shifted slightly, and by the 3rd note, the shift was definitive enough that Sophia could see it. When they finished, Reeves looked at the Morgan survey document for a long time. Then he looked at the land grant. Then he looked at them. You understand what you have here, he said. It was not quite a question. Sophia's interpretation. Sophia's interpretation is correct. Reeves set the documents down with the careful deliberateness of someone handling something valuable. Crane's southern intake has been operating on Hunter water rights. For how long has he had that intake? At least 7 years, Levi said. Maybe more. 7 years of unauthorized use of documented water rights. Reeves folded his hands. In territorial law, that's not just a dispute about purchase price. That's adverse usage without authorization. Crane doesn't just owe Hunter a fair price for the water rights going forward. He owes 7 years of back usage. The silence in the room was very complete. How much? Levi asked. Reeves told him the number. Levi sat back in his chair. The number was by any calculation enough to cover the bank loan in full retire, the debt restock, the herd repair, everything on the ranch that had been deferred through 2 years of financial pressure and still have enough remaining to constitute a genuine foundation. He'll fight it, Reeves said. Don't mistake this for simple. He has resources and he has lawyers, and he is not going to hand over what you're owed without a serious struggle. He looked at them both. But his position is substantially weaker than he believes it is, because he's been operating on the assumption that you don't know what the grant says and that the Morgan survey is lost or inaccessible. He tapped the documents. You've just removed both of those assumptions. Sophia looked at Levi. He was sitting very still. She knew that stillness by now. It was the stillness of a man processing something significant without letting the significance move him more than he chose to allow. He looked up and met her eyes, and in that look was something she had not expected. Not gratitude, not relief, though both were there. Something that had more weight than either of those. The specific look of a man who has been carrying something alone for so long that the sudden presence of a true partner has rearranged his understanding of what carrying alone had cost him. She held that look for a moment. Then she looked at Reeves. What do we do first? What they did first was file. Reeves drafted the initial legal claim that same afternoon, a formal assertion of Hunter's full water rights as established by the Morgan survey, combined with a notice of unauthorized usage going back 7 years. He sent copies by telegraph to Denver to the Territorial Land Commissioner and by registered mail to Aldous Crane's attorney in Colorado Springs. The moment this lands on Crane's lawyer's desk, Reeves told them before they left, everything changes. He'll make noise. He'll make threats. He may try to accelerate his timeline at the bank. We need to be ready for that. What does being ready look like? Levi asked. It looks like not letting anyone on your land without witnesses. It looks like keeping records of everything, every contact, every conversation, every approach by Crane or anyone working for him. He looked at Sophia. And it looks like having someone with legal knowledge at that ranch who can identify if something irregular happens. She felt both men looking at her. She kept her eyes on Reeves. I'll be there, she said. They rode home in 2 days instead of 3 because the weather held, and Levi was pushing the pace in a way that had nothing to do with impatience and everything to do with the particular urgency of a man who has been told his house is more valuable than he knew and wants to be in it. On the second night, camped close to the mountain road, the fire going properly between them. Sophia looked up from the account book she'd brought. She had been running numbers the entire trip, testing scenarios, looking at what Reeves's filing meant for the timeline, and found Levi looking at her. He didn't look away when she caught him. What? She asked. I was thinking about what you said at the beginning, he said, when I told you I didn't need to know anything about you. And I was right that I didn't need to know it, he said slowly. To decide to open the door. That part I was right about. He paused. But I've been thinking about why you were at 7 families in 7 months. What I mean is, I've been thinking about what those people missed. Sophia was very still. They missed everything, Levi said quietly. Everything that mattered. And I don't think I understood until this week how much they missed. She looked at him across the fire. She had been wrong about a great many things in 7 months. She had been wrong about the Coltons. Wrong about the Hargraves. Wrong about what the 7th family would mean. She was not sure she had been wrong about this. Don't make it more than it is, she said. Her voice was steady, but not cold. Not yet. He looked at her for a moment. Fair enough, he said. He went back to whatever he was thinking about, and she went back to her accounts, and the fire burned between them, and somewhere up the mountain road, the ranch waited. And beyond the ranch, the legal machinery they'd set in motion was already moving, and Aldous Crane would receive his notice within the week. Everything was in motion. And Sophia Bennett, who had been turned away by 7 families, who had walked up a mountain road in a snowstorm with 42 cents and found a door that opened. Sophia Bennett felt for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not settled. Not safe yet. The hardest part was still ahead. But in the right place. With the right person beside her. Facing the right direction. That was enough. For now, that was more than enough. That was enough for now, that was more than enough. But enough had a way of running out faster than a person planned. And the morning they rode back onto Hunterland. The first thing Sophia saw at the gate told her that the time for enough was already over. A man was waiting, not Crane. Younger than Crane, with the look of someone hired to deliver messages, rather than compose them, a flat-faced, watchful young man, on a brown horse, holding an envelope in one hand, with the particular careful posture of someone who'd been told not to lose it. Levi saw him at the same moment Sophia did. She felt the change in him before she saw it. A tightening, a gathering of attention. The way a man collects himself when he recognizes that something has started, that he cannot stop now. He rode up to the gate. "You Hunter." "I am." The young man held out the envelope. Levi took it. He didn't open it immediately. He looked at the young man with that level gray-blue gaze. "Who sent you?" "Mr. Crane's office." The young man's eyes moved to Sophia briefly, and then away. "I was told to wait for an answer." "Wait inside the gate," Levi said. "I'll give you an answer shortly." He rode past the man without another word, and Sophia followed, and they dismounted at the barn, and Levi opened the envelope. She watched his face. She had gotten good at reading it. Not fully, there were still things he kept deep enough that she couldn't reach them, but the surface movements she could track now. And what moved across his face as he read was not fear and not anger, but something more controlled than either. The expression of a man who has been told something he suspected but needed confirmed. He handed her the letter. It was from Crane's attorney. The language was formal, dense, deliberate, in the way that legal threats always were when they wanted to sound like something other than threats. The substance, stripped of its formality, was this: Crane was aware that Hunter had been to the land office. Crane was aware that Hunter had retained legal counsel. Crane was prepared to dispute any claim regarding the water rights on the grounds that the Morgan Survey of 1871 had never been formally registered with the Territorial Land Commissioner, and therefore carried no binding legal weight. Furthermore, Crane's attorney noted that Hunter's loan extension at the Kansas City Bank would reach its term in 63 days, and that the bank had indicated it was not prepared to extend again, and that Crane's offer, which had been generous and remained open, would be formally withdrawn in 14 days. 14 days. Sophia lowered the letter. "He found out faster than Reeves expected," she said. "Yes." Levi's voice was controlled. Flat in the way things go flat when someone is managing something large. "The survey registration question, is that a real issue?" "I don't know." He looked at her. "Do you?" She thought carefully. Reeves would know. The registration question could be a genuine legal argument, or it could be a stall tactic designed to create enough uncertainty that you accept the offer before anyone can sort it out. She folded the letter. "We need to wire Reeves today. And the bank deadline, 63 days. She did the calculation quickly. Reeves can't resolve this in 63 days through normal proceedings. Crane knows that. She looked at him steadily. This letter isn't a legal argument. It's a pressure play. He wants you to believe the ground under you is less solid than it is, so you take the offer before the 14 days are up. Levi looked at the gate where the young messenger was still waiting. What do I tell him? Nothing that concedes anything, Sophia said immediately. Tell him Hunter has received the correspondence and it has been referred to his legal counsel. Nothing more. He looked at her. Then he walked back to the gate and said exactly that word for word. And the young man nodded and rode off down the mountain road, and Levi stood watching him go for a moment before he turned back. "We wire Reeves now," he said. "Yes." "And then we prepare for the next thing he sends." "Yes." He looked at the ranch, at the house, the barn, the fence line, the land that rose and spread around them in every direction. "He's not getting this," Levi said. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just the simple absolute statement of a man who has reached the bottom of his willingness to be moved. Sophia felt something shift in her own chest. A conviction that had been building for weeks and was now fully formed. "No," she said. "He's not." Reeves wired back within 24 hours. The message was longer than a standard wire, which meant he'd paid extra to send it, which meant it was important. The registration question he wrote was legitimate, but not fatal. The Morgan survey existed in two forms: the original field notes, which were held by the surveyor's estate, and a certified copy that had been filed with the Colorado Territorial Office in 1873. The 1873 filing predated the formal registration requirement. It was defensible. It would take argument, but it was defensible. He also wrote, "Prepare for escalation. This is what Crane does." Sophia read the wire 3 times. Then she wrote out a summary for Levi Clean, organized the key points in order of importance, because she had learned that when things moved fast, having the information in a form that could be reviewed quickly was worth the time it took to prepare it. She handed it to him that evening. He read it, looked at her summary, read the wire again. "Defensible," he said. "Reeves doesn't use words carelessly. He's saying we can win, but it's not clean. He's saying we have a genuine legal position, and the outcome will depend on argument and evidence and the right venue." She sat across from him at the table. "That's different from having no case. That's actually a strong position compared to where you were 3 weeks ago." He looked at the summary in his hand. 3 weeks ago, I didn't know what I had." "No." Something crossed his face. She let it cross. "That box in the loft," he said. "I knew there were papers in it. I kept the door closed." "You said that before, about the pantry." He almost smiled, not quite. "I have a habit," he said, "of closing doors on things that need attention. Of managing what's in front of me, and hoping what's behind the closed door holds." He set the summary down. "It's a bad habit." "It's a survival habit," Sophia said. "When there's too much to manage, you triage. You address what requires immediate action, and you defer what doesn't. It makes sense. It's just eventually the deferred things accumulate." He looked at her. "When did you learn to do that, not defer things?" "When I had no one to defer them to," she said simply. "When you're alone, and you defer a problem, it becomes a larger problem, and you're still alone with it. So you learn not to defer." A silence. "You've been alone for a long time," he said. It was not quite a question, and not quite a statement. Something careful and direct, the kind of thing he said when he was paying attention. "Yes." "Not by choice." "No, not by choice." He nodded once. That brief, uncomplicated acknowledgement. "Me neither," he said. The fire cracked. The wind moved outside. Neither of them said anything further about it, and neither needed to. The escalation came 4 days later. It did not come in the form of another letter. It came in the form of 3 men on horseback who rode up the mountain road at mid-morning and stopped at the gate and did not call out. Sophia saw them from the kitchen window. She did not call for Levi immediately. She watched. 3 men horses she did not recognize, not moving, just sitting at the gate, looking at the house. One of them had the look of a foreman, a broad, patient, experienced man who had done this kind of thing before and was not in a hurry. The other 2 were younger, harder, the kind of men hired to stand behind the man who did the talking. She set down what she was doing and went to find Levi. "How was in the barn?" She told him what she'd seen in 20 words. He listened, put down his tools, and walked to the barn door and looked. He picked up nothing on his way out. No rifle. No weapon visible. He walked to the gate with his hands open at his sides, and Sophia followed him. The foreman type looked down at Levi from his horse. "You're Hunter." "I am." "Mr. Crane sent me to relay a message." "Then relay it." The man's eyes moved to Sophia, standing at Levi's shoulder. Not behind him, beside him. The man looked back at Levi. "Mr. Crane is willing to increase his offer by 15% above the original figure. One time. Cash settlement bank transfer within 10 days of signing." He paused. "He says that's more than fair given the questions about the survey registration." "I've noted the offer," Levi said. "My answer is the same as it's always been." The man nodded slowly. He was not surprised. "Mr. Crane also wanted you to know that winter comes early up here." His voice was even. Flat. The particular flatness of a message being delivered exactly as written. "He's concerned about the safety of the road. The supply riders. The kind of difficulties that come with mountain winters for a ranch operating alone." There it was. Sophia felt her jaw tighten. She kept her expression still. Levi's voice didn't change. "I've managed 11 mountain winters," he said. "I'm grateful for Mr. Crane's concern. My answer is the same." The man looked at him for a long moment. Then his eyes moved to Sophia again, and this time they stayed. "You're the woman from the Prescott place," he said. Not aggressively, almost thoughtfully. She met his gaze directly. "I don't know what you've been told about me," she said. "But whatever it was, what you're looking at is someone who knows Thomas Reeves personally, has a complete record of every contact Crane's representatives have made with this ranch, and will be writing a detailed letter to the Territorial Land Commissioner this afternoon." She paused one beat. "Please tell Mr. Crane that." The man looked at her. Something moved in his expression. Not respect, this was not a man who was going to offer a woman respect easily. But something adjacent to it. The recognition of something harder than he'd expected to encounter. He looked back at Levi. "I'll pass along what I've heard," he said. He turned his horse. The three of them rode back down the mountain road. Sophia and Levi watched them go. When the horses had disappeared around the first curve, Levi exhaled slowly, controlled, but she heard it. "You knew his name," he said. "The foreman. You'd seen him before." "He worked for the Hargrave family briefly before he moved operations," Sophia said. "I didn't know him well, but I knew he would recognize me." She paused. "I used that." He turned to look at her. "You used it deliberately." "Yes." "To make him uncertain about what we had. To make him uncertain about how much we knew and how connected we were." She met his gaze. "We do know a great deal, and Reeves is connected. I just made sure the message going back to Crane included that fact." He looked at her for a moment. "Sophia," he said. "Don't," she said. It was practical. "Let's go write that letter." The letter to the Territorial Land Commissioner took her 2 hours to draft. She wrote it carefully, the way she had written careful things all her life, with full attention to what each word was doing, with awareness that documents had afterlives longer than the moment that produced them. She stated the facts. She cited the original land grant. She cited the Morgan survey. She cited the 1873 filing date. She described the 3 men at the gate that morning, dates times the specific language used as a formal record of intimidation. She did not editorialize. She did not accuse. She simply laid out in clean and precise language what the documented situation was and what had occurred. When she was done, she handed it to Levi to read. He read it once. Then he read it again. He set it down. "You should have been an attorney," he said. "Women aren't attorneys," she said. "That's not an answer to what I said." She looked at him. She hadn't thought about it in years, the way she'd once thought about it at 18 before the world had corrected her about what was and wasn't possible. She had put it away, the way you put away things that cause pain when handled. No, she said finally. "I suppose it's not." He looked at her in a way that was different from the other ways he looked at her. More direct. More open. The look of a man who is seeing something clearly that he has been seeing obliquely for weeks and has decided to stop pretending he doesn't see it. "When this is over," he said slowly, "there are things I'd like to say to you that don't make sense to say yet. She went very still. Why don't they make sense yet? Because you're in my home on terms that I set. Because you came here without a place to go, and I was the one who offered you options. He looked at the letter on the table, then back at her. I need you to be free to leave before I can ask you anything about staying. It was the most careful and the most honest thing she had heard any man say to her in her entire life. She sat with it for a moment. That's a reasonable position, she said. I'm a reasonable man. I'm aware. She picked up the letter. Let's get this to the supply writer before this afternoon. The 14th day came. Crane's 14-day deadline, after which the offer would be formally withdrawn. That day arrived like any other day, gray and cold, with the horses needing feeding, and the fire needing tending, and the 1,000 small requirements of a working ranch. Proceeding entirely indifferent to legal deadlines and power plays. No rider came with a withdrawal notice. Sophia had expected that. A deadline was a pressure tactic, not a commitment. Crane would not withdraw the offer because withdrawing the offer removed a lever. He would extend it quietly and keep the pressure going by other means. What she had not expected was the letter that came instead. It arrived with the afternoon supply rider addressed to Sophia Bennett. In handwriting she recognized immediately. Her chest did something complicated, and she stood for a moment holding the envelope before she opened it. It was from Gerald Prescott. She read it standing in the cold outside the barn, and what Gerald Prescott had written was this, that he had heard she was at the Hunter Ranch, that he wanted her to know that his family had made an error, that his wife Marjorie had been distressed by the manner of her departure and had spoken about it repeatedly in the weeks since, that they were prepared to offer her a better arrangement, a proper wage, a longer-term position, if she wished to return. He wrote, "We would very much like to have you back." Sophia folded the letter. She stood with it in her hands for a long moment, feeling the weight of what it was. 7 months. 7 doors. And now the 7th door opening after the fact, reaching back to reclaim what it had thrown away. She walked inside. Levi was at the table. He looked up and saw her face, and he did not ask immediately which was one of the things she valued most about him, his instinct to wait. She put the letter on the table. "From Gerald Prescott," she said. "He wants me to come back." Levi looked at the letter. He did not touch it. "What are you going to do?" She looked at him steadily. "I'm going to write him a polite response explaining that I have a current position and am not available." She sat down. "But I wanted you to know about it." He was very still. "Why?" "Because you told me you needed me to be free to leave before you could ask me anything about staying," she said. "So I'm being transparent about what I'm choosing and why I'm choosing it." Something moved through his expression slowly, like weather moving across a landscape. "You're choosing to stay," he said. "I'm choosing to stay. Not because you have to. Not because I have to." He was quiet for a long moment. Sophia. Whatever he was going to say, he didn't say it, because at that exact moment, there was the sound of a horse at the gate, moving fast, moving with purpose, and they both heard it, and both went to the door. The man at the gate was not one of Crane's riders. He was a young man Sophia had never seen before, breathing hard. His horse lathered from a hard ride, and he had the look of someone carrying something urgent. "I'm looking for Sophia Bennett," he said. Sophia stepped forward. "I'm Sophia Bennett." "Message from Thomas Reeves," the man said. "He said to bring it directly to you, not send it with the regular post." He held out a sealed letter. He said it was time-sensitive. She opened it right there at the gate in the cold, with Levi standing at her shoulder. Reeves had written quickly. His handwriting was faster and less precise than his usual correspondence, which told her he'd written it in a hurry, which told her something had happened. What had happened was this. A man named Ellis Cartwright, who worked as a records clerk in the Colorado Springs County office, had come to Reeves 2 days ago with information. Cartwright had been approached by Crane's attorney 8 months ago to alter a date on a county filing, specifically to change the recorded date of a water usage permit, backdating it in a way that would suggest Crane's intake predated Hunter's grant. Cartwright had declined at the time, but he had kept the record of being asked. And when Reeves's filing had started moving through the territorial system, and Cartwright had seen the name Hunter in connection with a water rights dispute, he had understood what that earlier request had been for. He had come to Reeves with a written statement. Sophia looked up from the letter. "What does it say?" Levi asked. "Crane's attorney tried to alter county records," she said, "to backdate a permit that would undermine your claim." She looked at him. "They couldn't do it cleanly, so they didn't, but the request was made, and there's a witness." Levi went completely still. She felt it, the full weight of what this meant settling between them. This was not a civil land dispute anymore. This was evidence of attempted fraud against official records. The kind of thing that did not stay in a land commissioner's office. The kind of thing that went to the territorial court. The kind of thing that could end Aldous Crane. "Reeves wants us in his office as soon as we can get there," she said. "He says the window is narrow. Cartwright is willing to testify, but he's frightened. And if Crane's people find out he talked—" "We go tomorrow," Levi said. "We go tonight," Sophia said. He looked at her. "The road in the dark. The road in the dark is manageable if we're careful," she said. "Cartwright's nerve is not guaranteed to hold past another week. We don't know who Crane has watching Reeves's office. We don't know who might warn him." She met his gaze. "The only thing Crane doesn't have right now is this information. The moment he has it, everything becomes harder." Levi looked at the messenger. "Can you stay the night and rest your horse?" "Yes, sir." "Then stay." He turned to Sophia. "Give me 20 minutes to get the horses ready. I'll pack what we need." They rode through the night. Cold dark, the road barely visible, both of them trusting the horses more than their own sight on the steepest curves. Sophia did not complain about the cold, and Levi did not apologize for the pace. They moved like two people who had stopped needing to negotiate the small things and could focus the whole of their attention on the large ones. Around midnight, on a flat stretch of road, Levi spoke. "Do you know what Crane will do when he finds out about Cartwright?" "He'll try to discredit him," she said. "A records clerk, no prominent connections, took a long time to come forward. Those are the things they'll use," she thought. "He'll also try to re-establish the timeline through other means. Secondary filings, witnesses who will say what he needs said." Can he succeed? He can complicate things. He can't undo a witnessed account of his attorney asking a county clerk to falsify records. She kept her eyes on the road. But he doesn't need to undo it completely. He just needs to create enough uncertainty that the case becomes expensive and long, and you run out of resources before he does. Levi was quiet for a moment. "And what stops that?" "Speed," she said. "And Cartwright's statement being on record before Crane knows it exists." She paused. "And us not making any mistakes between now and the courthouse." He looked at her. "What kind of mistakes?" "Anything that lets him reframe the story," she said. "Anything he can use to make this about something other than what it is." She turned to look at him in the dark. "It has to stay simple. Hunter Water Rights Morgan Survey, unauthorized usage, attempted falsification of records. Every time the story gets complicated, Crane benefits." He nodded slowly. "You've thought about this." "I've thought about very little else for the past week," she said. "I think about it when I'm working, and when I'm not working, and when I'm lying in that room at the back of your house listening to the wind." She looked at the road. "I think about what happens to you if we lose." He was quiet. "And what happens to you?" he said. Not a question, a recognition. She didn't answer that. The road curved upward, and they focused on the horses, and she let the silence stand, and somewhere in that silence, she acknowledged to herself what she had known for some time, that this was no longer about gratitude, no longer about a woman without options, finding a door that opened, no longer about an arrangement. This was something else. She didn't put words to it yet. The words could wait. Reeves was awake when they arrived, which told her he'd been expecting them to come in the night rather than the morning. He opened the door before they knocked and had coffee on the stove and a fire going, and the look of a man who had been thinking hard and was glad to stop thinking alone. Ellis Cartwright was there. How was a small man, neat with the particular anxiety of someone sitting in a situation he'd created for himself by doing the right thing, and was now experiencing the full weight of what the right thing costs. He looked at Sophia when she came in and said with the slightly desperate earnestness of a man who needs to explain himself, "I know I should have come forward sooner. I know that." "You came forward when it mattered," Sophia said. "That's what counts." He exhaled. Reeves had already taken Cartwright's full written statement. He had it on the desk in front of him, and he had 2 copies already made, and 1 copy was already on its way to the territorial judge by a trusted courier he'd sent at dawn, a fact he told them with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has gotten ahead of something. "The original is here," Reeves said. "I'm filing it with the land commissioner today when they open, and I've wired the territorial court in Denver." Levi sat down heavily in the chair across from Reeves. He looked at the statement on the desk. "Is this enough?" he asked. Reeves was quiet for a moment. He looked at Sophia, then at Levi. "For the water rights dispute, combined with the Morgan survey evidence, yes." He folded his hands. "For the attempted falsification that goes to the territorial court, and I cannot promise you an outcome. Courts are unpredictable when a wealthy man is on the wrong side of them, because a wealthy man can make the process last a long time." He paused. "But here is what I can tell you with certainty. Crane cannot acquire your land while this proceeding is active. His attempt to acquire this land is now part of the pattern of evidence. And the bank, Levi said. The bank's deadline becomes significantly more complicated when there is an active territorial court proceeding that includes the bank's senior officer's brother-in-law as a potential party of interest." Reeves looked at him steadily. "Banks do not want to be named in court proceedings. Banks respond to that threat by finding reasons to extend rather than foreclose." Levi sat with that. "You're saying the bank will back off. I'm saying they will need time to assess their position, which is time you have." Reeves leaned forward. "Hunter, you came here 2 weeks ago with documents and a problem. You leave today with a legal proceeding, a witness statement, an active territorial filing, and a position that is almost unrecognizably stronger than it was." He paused. "I'm going to need you to understand that this is a significant victory, even if it doesn't feel like one yet." Levi looked at Sophia. She looked back at him. He turned to Reeves. "When does Crane find out?" "When the territorial commissioner's office contacts him, which will be within a day of filing." Reeves was direct. "He will react. I want you prepared for that." What does reacting look like for a man like Crane? It looks like his attorney disputing every document. It looks like challenges to Cartwright's credibility. It looks like attempts to reframe this as a simple land dispute between neighbors rather than what it is. Reeves paused. "And it may look like something more personal. Crane is a man who is used to winning, and the most dangerous version of such a man is the one who understands he is losing." The room was very quiet. Sophia thought about the 3 men at the gate. She thought about the foreman's flat, patient voice delivering a message about mountain winters and road safety. She thought about what more personal might look like from a man with Crane's resources. "We need to be careful going back," she said. Levi looked at her. "I know. Not paranoid, but careful." She looked at Reeves. "Is there anything you need from us before we go?" "Only this." Reeves looked at them both. "Whatever happens in the next few weeks, do not engage with Crane directly. Do not negotiate, do not correspond, do not have conversations that aren't documented. Everything goes through me." He looked at Sophia specifically. "That includes you. You are not an attorney. You are not a party to this action. Crane's people will try to use any direct contact you have with them to muddy what you are in this situation." "What am I in this situation?" she asked. Reeves looked at her for a moment. "Right now, the most valuable witness to the pattern of conduct I've got." He said it simply. "Every conversation you've had with Crane's men, every message delivered at the gate, the letter with the veiled threat about mountain winters, that's all in your account. And your account is credible." He paused. "Don't compromise it." She nodded. They rode back to the mountain in the gray morning light, and neither of them spoke much, and the silence was not the comfortable silence of 2 people who have nothing left to say, but the weighted silence of 2 people who have everything still ahead of them and know it. When the ranch came into view, Sophia felt something she had no precise word for. A fierce, quiet territorial feeling. A sense of this is worth fighting for. That was directed not at the land specifically, but at something the land contained. At the door, the house. Inside the house, the fire they'd kept going. The pantry she'd organized, the ladder rungs, she'd repaired the account books she'd been through 100 times. The room at the back where she'd slept since the night a door opened when 7 others had closed. Levi reined in at the gate and looked at the ranch for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "We're not done," he said. "No," she agreed. "But we're not losing either." He pushed the gate open. "Then that'll do for today," he said. They rode through and the gate swung shut behind them, and somewhere down the mountain, Aldous Crane was about to receive news that would end his certainty and the legal machinery Reeves had set in motion was already grinding in their direction, and Sophia Bennett, who had been turned away by 7 families and chosen by one man dismounted in front of a ranch house that was beginning to feel not like borrowed shelter, but like something she would fight for. She had started fighting for it already. She just hadn't said so yet. She had started fighting for it already. She just hadn't said so yet. And saying so, she understood that morning as they unsaddled the horses in the cold barn, was going to be the next thing that required courage. And she had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act anyway, and she was not afraid of Aldous Crane. She was afraid of something smaller and more personal than Crane. She was afraid of being wrong about what she felt. But that was a problem for later. Right now, there were horses to water, and a fire to rebuild, and a ranch to tend. And the familiar work settled around her like something earned, and she let it. What neither of them anticipated was the rider who came up the mountain road that same afternoon. Not Crane's men, not a legal messenger, but a woman. A woman alone, which was unusual enough on a mountain road in December, that Sophia saw her from the window and stopped what she was doing and looked twice to be certain. She was perhaps 50, well-dressed in the practical way of a woman with money who had also worked hard, and she rode with the ease of someone who had spent her life on horseback. She came through the gate without hesitation, as though she had been here before, and dismounted at the front steps and knocked on the door with 3 sharp, confident raps. Sophia opened it. The woman looked at her with the specific, assessing look of someone who was not surprised to find a woman here, but had thoughts about it. "I'm looking for Levi Hunter." "He's in the barn. I can get him." "Please." Sophia went to the barn. Levi was there finishing with the horses. She told him there was a woman at the house, gave him what she'd observed in a few short sentences, and watched him go still in the particular way he went still when something landed that he hadn't expected. "Describe her," he said. Sophia described her. Levi closed his eyes for just a moment. "That's Margaret Holloway," he said. He said it the way people say a name that means a whole history. "Who is Margaret Holloway?" He picked up his jacket from the hook on the barn wall. "She owns the largest ranch in the valley below, 1,200 acres. She's been there 30 years. He paused. "She's also one of the ranchers whose water comes from the creek that feeds off my land." Sophia understood immediately. Crane's intake affects her water supply. "Every ranch below mine depends on that creek." He looked at her. "If Crane controls my water rights, he controls all of them." They walked to the house together. Margaret Holloway was standing in the front room when they came in, and she did not sit until Levi offered the chair, and she took it with the deliberate dignity of a woman who moved through the world on her own terms and had earned the right to do so. She looked at Levi directly. "You've been to Reeves," she said, not a question. "You heard. Word travels in the valley." She looked at Sophia, then back at Levi. "I also heard what Crane's men said at your gate, about mountain winters and road safety." Something moved across her face. "I've been hearing things like that for 18 months. Levi sat down across from her. "He's been pressuring you too. He's been pressuring everyone below your ridge," Margaret said. "Smaller operations have already sold. 3 families gone in the past year. People who were here before Crane arrived and will not be here next year." Her voice was controlled and precise, and underneath it was something that had been burning a long time. "I have not sold. I do not intend to sell. but I am running out of ways to resist a man who controls the conversation about what I legally have. He can't control that conversation anymore, Sophia said. Margaret looked at her. Reeves has Cartwright's statement, Sophia continued. The attempted record falsification, the Morgan survey, the full extent of the original water rights grant. She looked at the older woman steadily. Crane's position isn't as solid as he's been presenting it. Margaret studied her. You're not a lawyer. No. But you understand the documents. I do. Margaret was quiet for a moment. She had the look of a woman evaluating something carefully, not doubtfully, but with the thoroughness of someone who had made expensive mistakes by moving too fast and had learned to take the extra minute. My water rights go back to 1874, she finally said. Original grant properly filed. I have always assumed they were secure. She paused. I am now less certain of that assumption, because I have watched Crane acquire 3 neighboring operations in 18 months, using methods I could not quite name, but could not quite ignore. She looked at Levi. What I want to know is whether your legal action covers only your claim, or whether it establishes something broader. Levi looked at Sophia. She understood what he was asking. Reeves's filing establishes the Morgan survey as the governing document for all water rights originating from that creek, she said. If the survey holds, and I believe it will, then every downstream grant referenced against that survey is strengthened, not just Hunter's. She paused. That includes yours. Margaret sat with that. You're saying Crane's attack on Hunter's rights was also an attack on mine. I'm saying that if he had succeeded in acquiring this ranch and burying the survey question, the same argument he used to reduce Hunter's claim could have been used against any downstream holder. Sophia held the older woman's gaze. He needed to control the source first. Then the downstream claims become negotiating points rather than rights. The room was very quiet. Margaret Holloway looked at the fire for a long moment. Then she looked at Levi. I want to hire Reeves, she said. And I want to contribute to the cost of this proceeding, not as charity, as a party with standing. She paused. I am not the only one who will. There are 4 other Valley ranchers who have been watching what Crane does and waiting for something to hold on to. Her voice hardened just slightly. You've given us something to hold on to. Levi was quiet. Sophia could see what was moving through him, the weight of a year and a half of fighting alone, suddenly redistributed. The particular difficulty of a self-sufficient man, accepting that he did not have to carry this alone, and that accepting help was not the same as weakness. I'll wire Reeves today, he said. Tell him to expect your contact. Margaret nodded once decisive and stood. She looked at Sophia one more time, and what was in her eyes now was something different from the earlier assessment. Something that recognized a specific kind of competence that the world did not always have the grace to name. You've been here how long? She asked. About 6 weeks, Sophia said. Margaret looked at Levi. Don't let her leave, she said simply, and put on her coat and went to her horse. The wire to Reeves went out that afternoon. His response came the next morning, and it contained 3 pieces of information that changed the shape of everything. The first, the Territorial Land Commissioner had formally received and registered the filing. It was now an official proceeding. Crane could no longer act on the land without court oversight. The second, the Kansas City Bank had contacted Reeves's office to inquire about the nature of the proceeding and its potential implications for outstanding loans. The bank was, as Reeves had predicted, assessing its position. The March deadline, while not formally extended, was under review. The third piece of information was the one that changed the temperature of everything. Crane's attorney had filed a counter-response. In it, he disputed the Cartwright statement on grounds of the clerk's professional reliability. He disputed the 1873 filing date on procedural grounds. And this was the part that made Sophia read the paragraph twice he had named Sophia Bennett, specifically describing her as an individual of uncertain character and undisclosed background who had inserted herself into Hunter's affairs for reasons that warranted investigation. She set the wire down on the table. Levi watched her. What is it? She handed it to him. He read it. His face did something she had not seen it do before, Something tight and immediate and very controlled on top of something that was neither tight nor controlled. He named you, Levi said. Yes. He's trying to make you the story. Yes. She kept her voice even. If he can make this about who I am and where I came from and why I'm here, he takes the focus off what the documents say. It's a standard tactic. She paused. It also means he's more concerned about my involvement than he's showing. If they go looking into your background, Levi stopped. They'll find 7 families who declined to keep me, she said, directly, without flinching. They'll find a woman who moved between households in a territory where women's options are limited, who has no permanent address and no prominent connections, and who arrived at this ranch with 42 cents in her pocket during a snowstorm. He was looking at her with something that she recognized but did not yet let herself name. Sophia, that's the story they'll try to tell, she said. And I need to know before Reeves hears it, before it becomes part of the proceeding, whether that story concerns you. The question sat between them. She had asked it as directly as she had asked everything in her life, because she did not know another way to ask, and would not have used it if she did. She needed the true answer, not the comfortable one. Levi looked at her for a long time. You reorganized a failing pantry, he said. You replaced rungs on a ladder I'd been meaning to fix for 10 months. You found documents I didn't know I had, understood them better than anyone I've met, rode through a mountain night to get them to a lawyer, and stood at my gate and put a man twice your authority on his back foot with 2 sentences. He paused. That's the story about who you are. Crane can have the other one. She did not cry. She was not the kind of woman who cried easily. But something in her chest that had been braced against impact for a very long time released slightly like a joint that had been held rigid so long, the letting go was almost painful. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me for telling you the true thing. Levi. Sophia. They looked at each other. We should wire Reeves about the counter-response, she said. Yes, and prepare a statement about my role here. Something on record that addresses their characterization before it gets established. Yes. He stood. Write it. I'll add whatever you need from me. She picked up the pen. She wrote the statement that afternoon. It was 2 pages precise and factual, describing her professional background. The 3 years with the Topeka land attorney. The skills she'd developed, the nature of her work, and her current role at the Hunter Ranch in specific terms that made clear she was a household manager with relevant legal knowledge, not a party to the proceeding, and not a legal representative. She had Levi read it. He read it, took the pen from her without asking, and added 4 sentences in his own hand at the bottom. She read what he'd written. He had written, Miss Bennett's presence at this ranch is a matter of my choosing based on her demonstrated competence and integrity. I take full responsibility for any decisions made in connection with this proceeding. Any attempt to characterize Miss Bennett's background or circumstances as a point against the legitimacy of this case should be understood as what it is, a distraction from the documented legal facts. I have known this woman for 6 weeks and I know her character. Signed, Levi Hunter. She looked at what he'd written for a long moment. She handed it back to him. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. You put yourself on record personally. If they want to use it against you, let them. His voice was and final. It's the true thing. I'm not going to let them make you small so they can manage me. She could not speak for a moment. She looked at the statement in his hand, her careful 2 pages, and his 4 added sentences, and she understood that what those 4 sentences were was not just a legal addendum. They were a declaration. They were a man saying clearly and on record, I see this woman. I chose her. Take aim at me if you need to aim at something. She took a breath. Send it to Reeves today, she said. He sent it. That night, the fire was burning low, and the wind was doing something complicated and loud outside, and they were both still at the table, she with the accounts, he with a letter he was composing to Margaret Holloway about coordinating the Valley Ranchers, when Levi set down his pen. She looked up. He was looking at her with the expression she had still not fully named, but had stopped pretending she didn't recognize. I want to say something, he said. And I don't want you to redirect it to the accounts or the legal proceeding or something practical." She set down her pen. "All right." He was quiet for a moment, not searching for words, organizing them. She had learned that about him too. He was not a man who lacked words. He was a man who insisted they be the right ones. "When you came through that door 6 weeks ago," he said, "I told myself I was doing a practical thing. I needed someone to manage the house. You needed somewhere to be. The logic was clean." "It was clean?" she said carefully. "It stopped being clean about a week in," he said. "When I came in and the house smelled like someone lived here. And I understood that what I'd been missing wasn't the management. It was the someone." She was very still. "I've been alone on this mountain 9 years," he said, "and I was managing. I want you to understand that I was managing. I wasn't waiting for someone to rescue me, and I wasn't living in misery." He paused. "But I was living in black and white. And then you arrived and things had color again, and I didn't know what to do with that because I'd made a long peace with the black and white." She looked at him. "Levi, I'm not finished." She waited. "I put you in writing when Crane's attorney tried to make you into something small," he said. "I'd do it again without thinking. That's not—" He stopped, started again. "What I'm trying to say is that I know the difference between being grateful for competent help and what this actually is. And I think you know it too. And I think we've both been waiting for the right moment to say so, and I'm not certain there's going to be a right moment, because there's always going to be something. The legal proceeding, the bank deadline, the next thing Crane does." He looked at her steadily. "I don't want to wait for the right moment anymore." She had held herself very still through all of it. She understood the risk he was taking, not the legal risk, not the financial risk, but the specific and personal risk of a man who had lived alone for 9 years, saying out loud that he did not want to live alone anymore. She understood what it cost. She had paid versions of that same cost herself. "I'm not the woman Crane's attorney described," she said, "but I am a woman 7 families turned away. That's real. It's part of who I am. I know. I don't know what I am to you beyond the past 6 weeks. I know what you are to me," he said. "I've known for a while. I was waiting until you were free." "I wrote Gerald Prescott last week," she said. "I declined." "I know you did. I'm not staying because I have nowhere else to go." "I know that too." "Then what are you asking?" He looked at her with those gray-blue eyes that could be calm or cold, and were currently neither, were something else. Something open and direct, and slightly undefended in a way she had not seen in him before. "I'm asking if you want to stay," he said. "Not because of the ranch or the proceeding, or because I need someone to manage the kitchen. Because you want to be here." A pause. "With me." The fire cracked. The wind moved outside. Sophia looked at Levi Hunter, at this man who had opened a door in a snowstorm without conditions, who had waited, who had put her name on a legal document without being asked, who had learned the difference between color and black and white, and had chosen color. And she felt something complete and clear, the way things feel when they've been true for a while and finally get said. "I want to stay," she said. He exhaled, slow and real. "All right," he said. "All right," she agreed. They looked at each other for a moment longer, and then she picked up her pen, and he picked up his pen, and they went back to work, because there was still work to do, and the fire burned between them with the particular warmth of something established, and outside the mountain wind did whatever it was going to do, and neither of them was afraid of it. The next 2 weeks were the most complicated of the entire proceeding. Crane moved fast once he understood the position he was in. He filed 3 separate challenges to the Cartwright Statement, to the 1873 filing, and to the jurisdictional authority of the Territorial Commissioner over the specific water usage question. Each challenge was a separate piece of paper that had to be answered, and each one was designed to create delay and cost, and the grinding exhaustion that came from fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously. Margaret Holloway came through. She arrived at Reeves's office with 4 other Valley ranchers. Sophia heard this from Reeves in a wire that had the particular terseness of a man very busy with something going well, and the five of them collectively retained him and filed a joint amicus statement supporting the Hunter water rights claim. The statement was, Reeves wrote, devastating to Crane's position on the jurisdictional question because it demonstrated that the water rights in question affected a significant portion of valley agriculture and therefore plainly fell under territorial oversight. Crane's attorney responded by attempting to have Margaret Holloway's statement dismissed on procedural grounds. The commissioner dismissed the dismissal attempt, and then on a Tuesday, the kind of unremarkable Tuesday that history sometimes chooses to do its work, the bank in Kansas City sent a formal letter, not to Levi, to Reeves, withdrawing the March deadline pending resolution of the territorial proceeding. Reeves wired them immediately. Sophia was in the barn when Levi came to find her, the wire in his hand, and she looked at his face before she read it, and knew from his face what it said. She read it anyway. She read it twice. Then she set it down on the barn's workbench, and she pressed both hands flat on the wood, and she breathed, and Levi stood beside her, and did not say anything, because he understood that this moment needed a second to be real before it became the next problem. The bank had backed down. The March deadline was gone. They were not going to lose the ranch in 63 days. Reeves, she said finally. I know. We need to wire him back. The Valley Ranchers. Sophia. She stopped. He turned her by the shoulder gently, and she turned, and he looked at her. For 10 seconds, he said. Can we just for 10 seconds? She looked at him. She let herself feel it for 10 seconds. The full, clean weight of it. The bank. The deadline. The thing that had been looming over this ranch and this man for over a year dissolving. 8 seconds. 9. 10. She picked up the wire. We need to wire Reeves back, she said. And there's still the territorial proceeding. The water rights aren't settled yet. No, he agreed. Crane will push harder now that the bank leverage is gone. Yes. He has attorneys and money, and he will not stop easily. No. She looked at him. Are you ready for what comes next? Levi Hunter stood in his barn on his mountain ranch that was still his and would remain his, and looked at the woman who had found the documents that made that possible. And something in his expression was settled, and certain, and warm, in the specific way of things that have found their proper form. With you beside me, he said. Yes. She almost smiled. Not quite. Beside you, she said. Not behind you. I know the difference, he said. She did almost smile then, and a small, real one. Good, she said. Then let's get back to work. The territorial hearing was scheduled for the second week of February. In the weeks between the bank's withdrawal and the hearing date, the ranch operated with a different quality. Not calm exactly, because there was too much to do for calm, but grounded. The particular quality of people who know what they're fighting for and have stopped questioning whether it's worth fighting for and are simply getting on with it. Sophia worked through the water rights documents with Reeves via correspondence every second day, anticipating the arguments Crane's attorneys would make and preparing responses. She knew this territory now, not as a trained lawyer, but as a woman who had spent months inside these specific documents until she understood their structure, the way she understood a household, which was to say, completely and from the inside out. Levi worked the ranch and worked with Margaret Holloway's network, coordinating testimony from the 4 Valley Ranchers, whose downstream rights Crane's behavior had threatened. He was, she observed, a natural organizer, not in the loud declarative way of men who needed to be seen leading, but in the quiet way of someone who understood what needed to happen and made it happen, and the people around him adjusted to his direction without quite noticing they were being directed. One evening she told him that. He looked at her. You sound surprised, he said. I'm not surprised. She thought about it. I'm noticing things I didn't know to look for when I arrived. He was quiet for a moment. What else are you noticing? She looked at him. At this man she had known for 10 weeks now, who had gotten less strange and more familiar every day, in the way that good things did, who she understood in some ways better than she understood most people she'd known for years. I'm noticing that you built something real here, she said. Before I came. Before any of this. You built a real thing alone, and you held on to it for 9 years, even when holding on was hard. She paused. Not everyone can do that. He looked at the fire. It was easier to hold when I didn't know what I was missing, he said. She understood that. She had been the reverse. She had known what she was missing and had been denied it so consistently that she'd begun to wonder if the missing was the problem, if wanting too much or being too much or presenting herself in some uncorrectable way was why the doors kept closing. She knew better now. The doors had closed because the people behind them could not see what was in front of them. Levi Hunter had seen it from the first moment in the cold and the dark before she'd said a single word. Levi, she said. He looked at her. When this is over, the hearing, the proceeding, when it's settled, I want to talk about what comes after. She met his gaze. Properly. Not around the edges of it. He was quiet. What comes after, he said. What this is. What it becomes. She kept her eyes on his. I'm not asking for anything right now. I'm just telling you I intend to have that conversation. He looked at her for a long moment. Something settled in his face. Something that had been held at a careful angle for weeks shifted fully into place. I'll be there for it, he said. Good. Outside the mountain. Winter held everything in its cold, clear grip, and inside the ranch house, the fire burned with the warm steadiness of something tended, and Sophia Bennett, who had arrived on this mountain with nowhere to go and 42 cents and had stayed because she chose to pick up the water rights documents and went back to building the case that would determine everything. She knew what she was fighting for now. Not just the water rights, not just the ranch, not just the man across the table who had opened a door and then slowly and honestly opened everything else. She was fighting for the life that was being built inside this place. And she had never in 31 years had something that specific and that real to fight for. That made her very, very difficult to stop. That made her very, very difficult to stop. And Aldous Crane, who had spent 18 months stopping people, was about to learn exactly how difficult. The territorial hearing was set for the 14th of February, a date that carried no romantic significance to either of them, and a great deal of legal significance to everyone in the valley below. Reeves had written 3 days before to say the commissioner had confirmed the date, and that Crane's final motion for postponement had been denied cleanly without qualification by a commissioner who had read the full record and apparently arrived at some conclusions of his own about the pattern of conduct it described. Sophia read that wire standing at the kitchen table and felt something move through her that was not quite relief and not quite triumph, but something older and quieter than either. The feeling of a thing that has been moving in the right direction, finally reaching the place it was always heading. She wired Reeves back immediately. We will be there. Both of us. They rode down the mountain 4 days before the hearing. Not because the ride required 4 days, it required 2, but because Reeves had asked them to come early. There were witnesses to coordinate. There were documents to review in their final form. There was the matter of what Crane's attorneys had filed in their last submission, which Reeves described in his wire as aggressive but answerable, and which Sophia wanted to read herself before she trusted that assessment. She trusted Reeves. She trusted him completely. But she had also learned in a lifetime of relying on her own judgment that trusting someone completely did not mean surrendering your own eyes. Levi understood this without being told. They stopped the first night at a small inn on the valley road, and over supper, Sophia spread Reeves's latest correspondence on the table between them and went through it piece by piece, while Levi ate and listened and asked the occasional precise question that told her he had understood everything she'd said in the previous 10 minutes. Crane's final submission had done 3 things. It had attacked Cartwright's credibility through a deposition from a colleague who claimed Cartwright had been unreliable in his record-keeping, a deposition that, as Sophia read it carefully, had the particular smell of something prepared rather than remembered. It had submitted an alternative survey conducted by Crane's own surveyor in November, which predictably located the boundary of Hunter's water rights considerably north of where the Morgan survey placed them. And it had argued in the final section that the entire proceeding should be transferred from the territorial commissioner to a civil court in Colorado Springs, which happened to be the city where Crane had his primary legal and business connections. Sophia set the document down. The venue request is the most dangerous piece, she said. Levi looked at her. More dangerous than the alternative survey. An alternative survey conducted by someone Crane paid in November, 2 months after this proceeding began, will be treated accordingly by anyone looking at it clearly. She turned the page. But venue matters. If this moves to Colorado Springs, it moves into Crane's territory. His relationships. His history with the local courts. She paused. Reeves can fight the venue request. I believe he can win it. But we need to be certain he prioritizes it. Wire him tonight. First thing in the morning. I want to sleep on the exact language. She did sleep on it. She woke at 5 in the morning with the language clear in her mind and got up and wrote it while Levi was still asleep down the hall. And when he came to the breakfast table, she had the wire ready. He read it. He looked at her. You've been awake since 5. I had something to say and I didn't want to lose the shape of it. He looked at the wire again. This is good, he said. It was a simple statement, not a compliment. The recognition of someone who knew the difference between adequate and good. Send it when we're done eating, she said. They sent it. Reeves responded by midday with 2 words already drafted. Then below that you and I think alike. Then below that, good. Colorado City, in February, had the particular cold of a place that didn't bother pretending winter was temporary. The streets were hard frozen, the air was clean and sharp enough to taste, and the territorial commissioner's office occupied a 2-story building on the main road that had the slightly self-important look of new institutions trying to establish permanence. Reeves met them at the door. He looked, Sophia thought, like a man who had been sleeping 4 hours a night for 2 weeks and was running on conviction and coffee. His eyes were sharper than ever, which was saying something. The venue motion was denied this morning, he said before they were fully inside. Sophia stopped. This morning. An hour ago. Commissioner ruled that the proceeding originated under territorial jurisdiction and that no basis exists for transfer. He held the door. Come in. There's more. There was more. The more was this in response to Crane's alternative survey Reeves had located through the estate of the original surveyor, R.H. Morgan himself, a set of field notebooks. Not the formal survey document, the working notebooks. The daily records of a surveyor doing his job with dates and measurements and the kind of granular specificity that could not be fabricated after the fact, because no one would think to fabricate it. The notebooks confirmed every measurement in the 1871 survey. They also contained something no one had expected, a notation in Morgan's own handwriting, dated October 14, 1871, that read, Observed existing intake structure, approximately 380 feet south of creek line. Structure appears recently constructed. Note for record intake, sits within surveyed water table boundary of Hunter Grant. Owner of adjacent southern property informed of boundary. Acknowledged receipt. Sophia read that notation 3 times. She looked up at Reeves. Crane's predecessor, she said. The man who owned that land before Crane bought it. Was informed in 1871 that the intake was within Hunter's water rights, Reeves said, and acknowledged it. He set the notebook down carefully. Crane didn't just inherit a water intake. He inherited documented knowledge that the intake was not legally his. The room was very quiet. Levi was standing very still. He knew, Levi said, not loudly, the quietest version of a man who has just confirmed something he suspected. His predecessor knew, Reeves said carefully. We cannot prove Crane himself had access to this notation. But we can prove the notation exists, that it predates his acquisition of the property, and that due diligence in purchasing that land would have uncovered it. He paused. In territorial law, a buyer who fails to conduct reasonable due diligence does not acquire rights the seller did not have. Meaning Crane never had legal rights to that intake, Sophia said. Meaning Crane's claim to that intake has been legally insupportable since the day he bought the property. Reeves looked at them both. This is not a dispute about competing interpretations of a survey. This is a case about a man who acquired property containing an undisclosed legal liability and then spent 18 months attempting to eliminate that liability by acquiring the property whose rights he was violating. He picked up his coffee. The commissioner will have this notebook tomorrow morning. The hearing is the day after. Levi looked at Sophia. She looked at him. She thought about the box in the loft, the closed door, 11 months of ladder rungs he hadn't fixed. She thought about what might have happened if she hadn't walked up a mountain road in a snowstorm and found a door that opened. She thought about how close it had been. "Thank you," Levi said to Reeves, and then looking at Sophia, "Both of you." Reeves waved this off with the gesture of a man who found gratitude inefficient. "Save it for the day after tomorrow," he said. "We're not finished yet." The night before the hearing, Sophia could not sleep. She lay in the small room at the inn and stared at the ceiling and let her mind do what it needed to do, which was run through every document, every argument, every piece of evidence in its proper sequence. She did this not because she was afraid they would lose. She was no longer afraid of that, but because her mind was the kind of mind that could not stop until it had covered everything, and she had learned to let it run rather than fight it. Around midnight, there was a quiet knock at her door. She sat up. "Sophia." Levi's voice low. She opened the door. He was dressed, which meant he hadn't slept either. He had a look on his face that she hadn't seen before. Not the controlled steadiness, not the near smile, but something more exposed than either. The look of a man standing at the edge of something large. "I needed to say something," he said. "Before tomorrow." She waited. "Whatever happens in that room," he said, "I need you to know that none of what comes out of it changes what I said to you 3 weeks ago. About staying. About what I want." He paused. "Win or lose tomorrow, you have a home on that mountain. With me. That's not conditional on the outcome." She looked at him. "I know that," she said. "I needed to say it anyway." "I know you did." He looked at her for a moment. "Are you afraid?" he asked. She considered the question honestly. "Not of losing," she said. "I think we're going to win. I'm—" She stopped, looked at him. "I'm afraid of what comes after the legal question is settled, when there's no external thing requiring us to be exactly where we are." She met his gaze. "I've been moving toward something for months. I'm not sure what I do when I arrive." He was quiet for a moment. "You stay," he said. "That's what you do. You already chose it. The arriving isn't a problem. You've been good at staying since the day you showed up." She looked at him. "You noticed that?" "I noticed everything," he said simply. "From the first morning." She felt something in her chest that she had no intention of examining at midnight before a hearing. She would examine it later in daylight when there was time. "Go to sleep," she said. "We need to be sharp tomorrow." "Yes." He didn't move immediately. "Sophia." "Levi." "After tomorrow," he said. "That conversation you said you wanted to have." "I remember. I'm ready for it." He looked at her directly. "I've been ready for it for a while." She looked at him for a long moment. "Tomorrow," she said. He nodded once. He went back down the hall. She closed the door and stood in the dark for a moment, and then she went back to bed, and she slept. The hearing room was smaller than she'd expected. She had imagined something with the weight of formal justice. High ceilings, carved wood, the particular gravity of a place where important things were decided. What she got was a plain room with a long table, 6 chairs, a territorial commissioner named Arthur Foley, who had a gray beard and reading glasses, and the unhurried manner of a man who had presided over enough disputed claims to be completely without illusion about human nature, and 3 chairs on the opposing side, occupied by Crane's lead attorney and 2 associates. Crane himself was not present. That told Sophia something. A man who was confident of his position came to watch it be confirmed. A man who had looked at the evidence and understood his position was untenable, sent attorneys and stayed away. Reeves saw her notice the empty chair. He leaned toward her and said quietly, "He'll have been advised not to attend. Reduces his direct exposure if things go badly." "They're going to go badly for him," she murmured. "Yes," Reeves said. "They are." Levi was beside her. He sat straight, hands flat on the table, the same controlled steadiness he always wore, but she could feel the tension in him. not fear, something more like the compressed energy of a man who has been moving toward a fixed point for a long time and is nearly there. She put her hand on the table next to his, not touching, just close. He glanced at her. She looked at Commissioner Foley. The hearing took 4 hours. Reeves presented the Morgan Survey, the 1873 territorial filing, the field notebooks, and the October 14th notation, in a sequence so clean and logical that Sophia could see Commissioner Foley following it in real time. The slight forward lean, the glasses removed and replaced, the occasional note made in a precise hand. When Crane's lead attorney stood to present the alternative survey, Foley asked 3 questions about its commission date and the surveyor's professional history. The attorney's answers were technically accurate and deeply damaging because the truth of the alternative survey's timing and the surveyor's prior professional relationship with Crane's business holdings could not be disguised when spoken aloud in a plain room by a man required to answer honestly. Cartwright testified. I was nervous, visibly, honestly nervous. The way a man is nervous when he has done the right thing and is standing in front of the consequences of it. But he was clear. His account of the conversation with Crane's attorney was specific, dated, and consistent with the written statement Reeves had already entered into the record. Crane's attorneys cross-examined him for 40 minutes and did not shake a single material fact. Margaret Holloway testified. She was not nervous. She was 61 years old and had been ranching in Colorado Territory for 30 years, and she testified with the particular authority of a woman who had earned every word she was about to say. She described 18 months of pressure. She named 3 families who had sold and left. She presented documentation of her own downstream water rights and their relationship to the Hunter grant. Foley asked her one question when she finished. In your assessment, Mrs. Holloway, does the pattern of conduct you've described represent an isolated dispute or a systematic effort to consolidate control of the valley water supply? Margaret Holloway looked at the commissioner. Systematic, she said, without question. Crane's attorney objected to the characterization. Foley noted the objection and moved on. At the end of the 4th hour, Commissioner Foley removed his glasses, set them on the table, and looked at both sides of the room with the expression of a man who has reached a conclusion that does not require further deliberation. I've heard sufficient evidence, he said. I'm prepared to rule. The room went very still. Sophia was aware of Levi beside her. She was aware of her own heartbeat. She was aware of the 4 hours of testimony and months of documents and one mountain snowstorm and a door that opened and a woman who had found something worth fighting for. Foley ruled. The Morgan Survey of 1871 was confirmed as the governing document for all water rights originating from the Hunter Creek. The subterranean boundary of 430 feet was established as binding. Crane's southern water intake was formally located within the Hunter water rights boundary. Crane's alternative survey was dismissed as commissioned evidence without independent corroboration. The prior knowledge notation of October 14, 1871, established that Crane had acquired property with documented water rights liability, and his subsequent actions, including the attempt to have county records altered, as documented by Ellis Cartwright, constituted a pattern of bad faith conduct. Crane was ordered to cease use of the intake within 30 days. He was ordered to pay 7 years of backwater usage fees, calculated at the standard territorial rate, to Levi Hunter. The amount covered the bank loan in full, the back payment on the loan extension, the cost of the entire legal proceeding, the restocking of the herd to its pre-loss numbers, and left enough remaining that Sophia, who did the mental arithmetic before Foley had finished speaking, felt her breath go out of her slowly and completely. The commissioner looked over his glasses one final time. Let the record show, he said, that the tactics employed in opposition to this claim, including intimidation, attempted record falsification, and deliberate suppression of prior survey documentation, represent a serious breach of the conduct expected of parties operating under territorial law. This ruling will be transmitted to the territorial court for consideration of further proceedings. He closed his folder. We're adjourned. Outside the hearing room in the plain hallway, Levi stopped walking. He stood with his back against the wall, and he closed his eyes for a moment, just a moment, just long enough for Sophia to see what a man looked like when something he had been bracing against for 18 months was suddenly no longer there. She stood in front of him and waited. He opened his eyes. He looked at her, and what was in his face was not triumph and not relief in the way people imagined relief looked. It was quieter than either of those things. It was the look of a man returning to himself after a very long time away. "It's over," he said. "The legal question is over," she said. "The ranch is yours. The water is yours. The debt is handled." She paused. "Everything else is still ahead." He looked at her. "Everything else," he said. "Everything else." I was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want to go home." She understood. Not just the word, the whole weight of what home meant to him now. The mountain. The ranch. The thing he'd built and held and nearly lost and not lost. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home." They stayed one more night for the formal documentation. Reeves needed signatures. The ruling needed to be properly recorded. There was the practical business of a legal victory that could not be left half-administered, and in the morning they had the conversation. Not in a courthouse. Not in Reeves's office. At the breakfast table of the inn over coffee that was worse than the coffee at the ranch in the plain daylight of a February morning after everything they'd been through. Levi set down his cup. "The conversation," he said. "The conversation," she confirmed. He looked at her. "I'm not going to propose to you over bad coffee in a roadside inn," he said. "I want to be clear about that." She almost smiled. "I appreciate the clarity, but I want to say what I said I would say." He looked at his hands, then at her. "You came to my door with 42 cents and a carpet bag, and 7 families behind you who were wrong about you. And I would like, when the time's right and the place is right and we're back on the mountain where both of us make the most sense, I would like to ask you to stay in a way that is permanent." He paused. "If that's what you want." She looked at him for a long moment. "You said you'd been ready for this conversation for a while," she said. "I have been. Why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because you needed to be free," he said. "I told you that. You needed to stay because you chose it, not because leaving was hard." She looked at him. "Leaving has never been hard," she said. "I've been very good at leaving. I've had a lot of practice." She held his gaze. "Staying is the thing that was hard, and I'm choosing it." "I know you are. I want to be useful here," she said. "Not as the woman who manages your house, as a partner in the full sense. The accounts, the decisions, the legal matters, all of it. Beside you. Not behind you." "I know the difference," he said. "You've said that before. And I meant it every time." She looked at him. This man, this particular and specific man who had seen her clearly in the dark before she'd said a word. Who had not asked about her past because he trusted his own judgment about her present. Who had written 4 sentences on a legal document that said in plain language, "I see this woman." Who had understood without being told the difference between beside and behind, and had never once in 4 months needed to be corrected on it. "When we're back on the mountain," she said, "ask me then." Something lit in his eyes. "You know what your answer is already," he said. It was not a question. "I know what my answer is already," she agreed. "But I want to hear you ask it in the right place." He almost smiled. The full version. The one she'd been collecting since the first week. "Fair enough," he said. They rode back up the mountain on a morning when the sky was the particular deep blue of a Colorado winter that had decided briefly to be beautiful about itself. The ranch came into view in the early afternoon. It looked the same as it always looked: the house, the barn, the fence line, the lean-to. Small against the mountain. Solid against the cold. Real in the specific way of things that have been maintained by someone who cared about them. Levi reined in at the gate. He sat there for a moment looking at it. Sophia sat beside him and let him look. She thought about 7 doors closing. She thought about a road in a snowstorm, and a wrong fork, and 42 cents, and a man who opened a door and said without condition, "You look tired, come inside." She thought about pantries and ladder rungs, and account books, and land grants, and Morgan survey notebooks, and a commissioner reading his ruling in a plain room, while she did arithmetic in her head and understood that everything was going to be all right. She thought about what Margaret Holloway had said, "Don't let her leave." She thought about what she had built here, not the kitchen, not the accounts, though those too, but the larger thing. The life. The partnership. The specific and irreplaceable shape of two people who had been alone for a long time, finding in each other the thing they hadn't known they were missing. She had not been enough for 7 families. She had been exactly enough for one man who knew how to see. Levi pushed the gate open. They rode through. At the door he dismounted, and she dismounted, and he looked at her across the horses with the mountain rising behind him, and the ranch house behind her, and the whole long winter ahead of them. "Welcome home," he said. She looked at him. Something in her chest that had been held tightly for 31 years, that careful, braced, protective thing that a woman built when the world kept telling her she was too much or not enough or the wrong kind of something, let go. Completely, quietly, like a door opening. "Ask me," she said. He looked at her. He understood. He came around the horses, and he stood in front of her, and he took both her hands in his, the hands that had replaced ladder rungs and reorganized pantries and written legal documents and held account books by firelight. And he looked at her with those gray-blue eyes that had seen her clearly from the first moment. "Sophia Bennett," he said, "will you stay?" She looked at this man who had been alone for 9 years and had opened a door in a snowstorm and changed everything that came after. "Yes," she said, "I will stay." Not because she had nowhere else to go. Not because 7 families had turned her away and left her with no other option. Not because a lonely mountain cowboy had been kind to her when she needed kindness, but because she had chosen it clearly, freely, with both eyes open and her whole heart present the way she had learned to choose everything that mattered, without apology, without condition, and without ever once looking back at the doors that had closed. She was home, and this time the door would not close behind her. This time she was the one who decided when she stayed and when she left, and she had already decided. She was staying. Forever was a long word, but Sophia Bennett had never been afraid of long words. She had only ever been afraid of wrong ones. And standing on that mountain in that cold, clean air with Levi Hunter's hands around hers, and the ranch behind them, and the whole future ahead, there was not a single wrong word in sight.